This podcast is brought to you by Spirits and Distilling for those who make and drink great spirits. Join our free email newsletter for technical and creative distilling stories in your inbox every week. Learn more at spiritsanddistilling.com.
Hello and welcome to episode 39 of the Craft Spirits and Distilling podcast. I'm your host, Molly Troop, and today with me is Jarrad Hucksold, of previously the head blender for Starward and current blender and distilling consultant for the Cask company. We are going to talk a lot about blending, and I'm very excited to hear Jarrad's perspective, especially from the land down under. Before we dive in, G&D Chillers understands that each distillery's chilling requirements are unique. On every distillery project, G&D offers the front-end design and engineering your team needs at no cost to you. Sid Delaray from Filibuster Distillery says, from the design and engineering to installation and startup, G&D was easy to work with. We've had great customer service since commissioning our chiller, and I'd highly recommend them for any distillery system. Reach out for a quote today at gdchillers.com. Thanks so much for being here today. I'm very excited to get to talk with you. I'd love for you to just, dive right in and tell me how you got started in the spirits industry.
Yeah, sure, of course. And thank you for having me on the podcast. It's really nice to be here and chatting all things Australian spirits and blending as well. I do this day to day, but it's really nice to kind of geek out and talk to people in the industry as well, and talk all the nitty gritty details of spirits and blending. So yeah, I love it.
Absolutely. So excited.
So yeah, I've been in the probably spirits industry for a bit over 10 years now, and I did that. Yeah, 10 years of that was my stint as head blender at Starward Whisky. But prior to that, I got into the alcohol industry through wine. And I think in Australia, a lot of people in spirits enter through wine or beer because the industry is quite small here, and especially 10 plus years ago, it was very, very small. So, I started in a winery just as kind of like a casual cellar hand doing a vintage. Loved it. Loved everything about it. Just the whole process of kind of grape to eventually bottle. I just thought that process was really, really fascinating, and kind of decided to pursue that a little bit further, and went on to study winemaking, eventually do more work in the winery, do vintages, and then kind of just the one day, the right timing. It was actually all happened on the same day. Vintage kind of wrapped up for the season, so the harvest season finished. And then I saw the job advert being advertised for Starward Whisky, and I thought, oh, that sounds pretty cool. I'd like to go make whiskey in the Melbourne, in the city over. So I put my resume in, and then a few weeks later, I got the job, and then it was a pretty quick turnaround time to pack up the house and move into state, which was daunting, but also really exciting at the same time. So that was back in 2015, and then it was just kind of been a big journey from there.
I love that. How far of a move was that?
So in Australia, everything's a long way away. For Melbourne, so I was in Adelaide, and Melbourne and Adelaide are kind of the two closest cities, which would be a 8-9 hour car ride. So it's a big distance. Yeah. You got to kind of pick up everything and move across. Yeah. But yeah, it was moving to a big city, so it was very exciting, all the new things to kind of see and explore.
Yeah, I imagine that the whole every scene, like food, beverage, all of that's very different.
Yeah, absolutely. And Melbourne's got a really good kind of food and drink culture here. We're very spoiled for choice in terms of quality restaurants, bars, but also like now breweries, distilleries. Got two big wine regions about an hour drive away. So yeah, we're very, very spoiled over here.
Spoiled indeed. It's similar to Oregon. I feel like we're very spoiled as well. Yeah. I'd love to kind of talk about how your experience with wine has shaped your career with whiskey, and like how you've used that background to kind of guide yourself in your career so far.
Yeah. Well, I think initially I got very good at cleaning tanks, which I think no matter what part of the booze industry you're in, you always kind of start there, and you gotta get that process done first. But I think that transition to wine to whiskey was not as probably challenging as what I was expecting, because it involves a lot of the same things. Like a lot of the equipment that you use is the same, apart from the stills, obviously. But I got a lot of really good quality, like formal sensory training through my winemaking degree. And I think that was easily translatable into whiskey. And I think for us, which I'm sure we'll touch on shortly, is kind of the use of wine barrels. So using wine barrels day in, day out in the wine industry. And then later in my kind of spirits journey, transitioning that across to maturation of whiskey in wine barrels. So kind of having that understanding of how these barrels work, interact with liquids. I think that was a really, really like advantage coming from the wine background and then moving into whiskey. So just having that experience through wine made me think about barrels in a different way in the whiskey landscape.
Yeah, I mean, let's dive into that whole kind of conversation. As head blender for Starward, it seems like there's a decision to age an X red wine barrels, maybe exclusively, or at least for like the main portion of your SKUs. Why was that decision made, and what impact has that had on the whiskey?
That was a really like kind of big decision from the company, like really early days of Starward. So Starward kind of formed around 2009, 2010 was kind of the first liquid off the stills. So obviously a few years prior to that, getting things set up. So 2010 was kind of the kickoff of Starward Whisky, and we were very fortunate at that time because the industry wasn't that big. There was probably there's probably about 10 distilleries across the whole country, and that's not just whiskey. That's all distilleries. So I guess at that time we were very fortunate because we had access to really, really good quality fortified wine barrels coming out of some big wine producers in Australia. And so fortified wine barrels that have held what we call a Pera, which is kind of the Australian version of sherry, and Tawny, which is kind of the port version. So all these barrels have been holding a Pera and Tawny for 20, 30, 40, 50, sometimes up to like 60, 70, 80 years. So wildly cool barrels, really, really cool barrels. And we kind of, for wineries, they'd use them until they barely held liquid anymore. We'd get our hands on them, get them recoopered, let shave, toast, recharred. And we could make these incredibly rich, full-bodied whiskies because these barrels just soaked up so much flavor over the years from the wine. So in the early days, it was great. There was an abundance of these excellent barrels. Kind of as time progressed, more distilleries opened, more competition for these barrels came along, and probably you weren't getting the quality as what you once were. And so the founder of the company kind of went down the path of like, well, we're very fortunate in Australia because we have incredible wine industries at our doorstep. So in Melbourne, we've got the Yarra Valley, Mornington Peninsula, about an hour's drive away. So he thought, why not we use what's available to us, use ingredients that we have basically just down the road. And that's kind of where the process of the red wine barrels came about, because there's a lot of red wine barrels out there in the industry. They're at a very affordable price. So makes sense, right? And that was kind of how it all started. And there was no real testing period or anything. It was just kind of all in. So it was a real gamble, I think, at the time to kind of change the style and profile of the whiskey. And this is dating back to probably 2012 when this was going on. And we went all in, changed the whole maturation profile. And as you kind of touched on before, probably I reckon 90% of the spirit that we made went into some form of red wine barrel. So it was a big shift, and we made some mistakes along the way in the early days, and we learned a lot. We learned a lot very fast about probably parameters on the barrels and what you should and shouldn't fill. But once we got there and we worked through the teething issues, I mean, we've had some quite big success from the wine maturation. So yeah, it was a massive journey, a massive learning curve in the early days. But once we kind of ironed out the kinks, it was great and a lot of fun. And we got to work with so many cool wineries, winemakers, producers, and kind of even do for like few little cool collaborations along the way.
Yeah, I love that. I'd love to dive a little bit more into, you mentioned learning curve. And I think what pops to mind as someone who's aged a little bit in red wine barrels as well as, the impact of sulfur and how prevalent that is in wine industry. It's and not really in whiskey, and that kind of conversation you have to have with a red wine supplier that of those barrels to make sure like they haven't been sulfured. So I can imagine that being part of a learning curve, but I'm sure that
Absolutely.
there's so much more that you could talk about.
Yeah, the sulfur one. That was definitely a big challenge. And I think, and that's touching back on the kind of starting from the wine industry. I think that really helped. That really helped me move into whiskey and especially the red wine barrels because I kind of understood it. I understood what sulfur is. When you see it in spirits, obviously it's not enjoyable and you don't want it to be there. And I know that was probably one of the challenging things. And that's why we really, at the early days, worked direct with winemakers and wine producers because you really got to explain to someone in the wine industry that obviously they love sulfur because it keeps everything stable, keeps the barrels stable, and it's great for what it does. It really works well. Whiskey, on the other hand, you don't want any sulfur. So to try and explain that to a winemaker, saying actually when you empty your barrel, don't sulfur it. They just think, oh, it's going to go volatile, it's going to go off straight away, and it's like, no, empty it. We'll be there this afternoon or the next day to pick the barrels up to then fill it with spirit. It'll be fine. Don't worry about it. It's just a day or two. And because we did run into quite a few issues in the early days of filling barrels that had been sulfured, and then also not kind of prepared and cleaned out well enough prior to spirits. And it's one of those things you kind of some of these barrels didn't realize until kind of 2-3 years later, because what we would do, we'd fill barrel and kind of the first sensory check is about 2 years of age. So it was a bit of a challenge and a bit of a project once we kind of realized that some of these barrels had sulfur. So, and then how to rectify that and the list goes on. So so that was probably the big learning curve, and I was probably when in my like kind of later years and working with other distilleries and producers is kind of really honing in on that and saying like that your barrels have to be tip top prior to filling, otherwise you're just going to create issues further down the line, harder to fix, more expensive to fix. So get it right at the start and you'll be fine.
Yeah. I was listening to a seminar on like fixing flaws a week or so ago. And it was fascinating because there's a mentality where you could either like dump a barrel that's flawed, and that's like everyone's worst day, right? And there's a mentality of, can this be blended out? And there's exceptions to every rule. Like there is no like straightforward path. It depends on what that flaw is. When it comes to like something that's been sulfured, is it something where it's like just dump the barrel? Or is it more of, this can be maybe like arranged in a certain way where it's not as pronounced?
Probably both. Both is the answer, and it probably depends on the intensity and kind of what's going on. But we had a lot of success with you taking that liquid out of that sulfury barrel and putting into basically a freshly charred barrel. So sulfur is really good at binding up to like kind of the char component in barrels. So we had some quite good success when with that process, and it was relatively quick. I mean, we've got a pretty fast maturation climate here in Melbourne, so probably 6 to 12 months in a new charred barrel, you would see that sulfur either clean up completely or to a point where you could kind of blend it away somewhere. But for the most part, it did quite a good job because there's obviously some faults and taints out there that no matter what you try, you'll never be able to get rid of. But for sulfur, thankfully, it was like probably probably one of the easier kind of faults or taints in whiskey to get rid of and to clean up. So that was probably what we had the most success with. We tried so many different ways, but pretty much it came down to it, just new charred barrel and give it time. You can't rush anything with whiskey, as I'm sure we all understand.
Oh yes, it's everyone. I think at some point thinks that they can cheat time when it comes to whiskey, and I think the older you get, somehow you get more patient, and you realize, no, that's maybe not what we should be doing.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
better places to put your energy.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the things I thought was very interesting was Starward speaking about a highly reactive maturation environment. And I'd love for you to just kind of like dive into what that might mean.
That's a really good point to touch on, especially for in Melbourne. I think you hear a lot about that kind of reactive climate in New World whiskey making. So from the States to Australia to Taiwan as well, especially with Cavalan. So we always kind of touch on when we talk about Starward Whisky is the reactive climate, and Melbourne's pretty famous for having 4 seasons in one day, which is probably one of the things I haven't enjoyed about moving to Melbourne. But we kind of have this. It's kind of just a bit of a ongoing joke with this climate here. Like you look outside in one time and the sun will be shining. Look outside 20 minutes later, and it's rainy and wet, and then the sun comes out again. So we have this climate and this environment here that's kind of all over the place. And I think with whiskey and maturation, we really use that to our advantage because we've got this massive fluctuation in temperature, day to day, season to season. So at the moment, we're pretty much in the middle of winter, which here is pretty mild. It gets down to probably 12 to 15 degrees Celsius. But in the summertime, we can get up to 40 degrees, which is over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So wildly diverse. And we see so much fluctuation just on the daily as well. So in that process, with this temperatures going up and going down, think about it in the cask maturation. So the cask is kind of warming up, cooling down on a daily basis, but then also quite dramatically through the seasons as well. So the casks that we have for whiskey are working very, very hard. They're kind of like, think about a cask breathing. It's kind of the liquids going in and out of the barrel with the fluctuation in temperature. So we would have a fully matured whiskey within kind of 3 years is kind of what we were working on. So legally in Australia, it's 2 years minimum barrel for it to be called whiskey. And we were finding we were hitting that kind of like peak maturation between 3 to 4 years for what we would class as our standard barrel, which is 225 liters. So yeah, that it really, great because we could turn around whiskey faster and we could do a lot of cool things with the barrels and do a lot of cool projects and not have to wait 10 plus years before it's ready. But it was at the same time, you really had to kind of keep an eye on your barrels and not let them mature too far and too fast and get too extractive. So it was an ongoing kind of challenge, but it's part of the fun, I guess, of making whiskey. And we're not here to kind of replicate Scotch whiskey or anything in Australia. We're here to make Australian whiskey. So we're using our climate and our barrels to our advantage.
Yeah. And a little segue, because I thought of this. For listeners, can we define what makes Australian whiskey? What makes it unique?
Yeah, that's a really good question because that question gets asked a lot currently kind of in Australia. And it's a really point of conversation that a lot of producers in Australia are having kind of right now and over the last kind of year or two is like, what is Australian whiskey? And I don't think it's really being defined yet because probably one of the advantages of being in Australia is there's the whiskey laws are much more relaxed to Scottish laws, for example. So a lot of this in distilleries in Australia, you can say you can buy wash from from a brewery, because a lot of people have very small distilleries and small startup capital. So what they'll do is they'll buy the still and get wash made from either nearby distillery or a nearby brewery, and just do this distilling process on site. So there's a lot of producers in Australia that are kind of doing different things, and they're not really restricted by kind of certain rules and regulations. So as a result of that, you just get this huge diverse portfolio of flavors, products, different styles of whiskeys, different grains. I mean, a lot of people are making single malt whiskey here and maturing it in red wine barrels, fortified wine barrels. But to kind of put the question of like, what is Australian whiskey? I think that's a unanswered question at this moment. And I think I don't want to be the one to kind of narrow into a box either. But I think it's definitely like a kind of a new world approach to kind of making whiskey, and there's a lot of experimentation and obviously a lot of use of wine casks. So I think wine barrels definitely play into the role of what is Australian whiskey, because a lot of people are using them. There's a lot of wine barrels available here, rather than kind of importing bourbon barrels from the States or kind of like sherry barrels from Spain or something like that. So wine cask probably plays a role, but that's probably about as far as I can kind of define Australian whiskey at the moment.
It's fascinating because Scotland, the US, they have some pretty rigid standards when it comes to like whiskey and how like bourbon is bourbon. If you're not making bourbon, you're making like corn whiskey and, all these different things. American single malt is a more newly defined category, and that's just happened this year. But do you see like a landscape in Australia where it's legally defined, or is it going to be continuing kind of this new world approach of innovation above all?
Yeah, I think there's been a lot of talk about that within the industry at the moment, because the current kind of rules kind of state 2 year made from a cereal grain and 2 years in wood. So it's a really vague wording, because wood doesn't mean oak, and there's no size volume on that wood either, because so in Scotland it's up to 700 litres, but technically if you follow those rules in Australia, you could put spirit in a 15,000 litre wooden vat, and in 2 years it's whiskey. It's probably not going to taste like whiskey in a vat that big, but that's what kind of the current laws state. So, and these date back to like 1900s, because there's a huge distilling history in Australia from back in the day, because there was a big gold rush kind of through Australia and Victoria in the kind of late 1800s and early 1900s. So there was a lot of money, a lot of people were making booze, and a lot of people were drinking booze because there was money going around. So that's kind of where these laws kind of state from. And so there has been a lot of chat kind of like within the industry about, do we need to kind of redefine Australian whiskey, probably more so in particular Australian single malt whiskey. And I think there'll be something probably in the next 2 to 3 years, there'll be something a bit more defined, because we're seeing a lot of countries do that as well. I think New Zealand did it last year, Japan did it probably the year before, and obviously the States as well, to kind of putting parameters around single malt whiskey. So yeah, I think we'll probably see something soon from an industry perspective, which pros and cons. I think the good thing about Australian whiskey and producers here is the flexibility and experimentation, but also I think we're trying to promote Australian single malt as a brand as a whole. So yeah, I think it builds a bit of credibility, and then people know what they get when they're buying Australian single malt on the label.
Mm-hmm. Makes total sense. All right, I want to dive a little bit more into maturation, and I'm always curious with different climates what any potential challenges are in regarding maturation, and is there any particular problem that Melbourne is plagued by?
Yeah, like we were kind of touching before about the 4 seasons in the day. Maturation probably going too fast. I think that was probably one of the big challenges of kind of managing the bond store and managing the barrels is probably maturation going too fast, too extractive, and probably in particular using wine barrels as well. And for us, we use a lot of what we class as fresh wine barrels. So these barrels were coming straight from the winery and not getting shaved, toast, charred. And so you pick up a lot of these really cool, bright fruits, red fruits from the wine barrel. But in that, you get a lot of tannins from the wine, tannins from the wood, and in a pretty intense climate as well, they can kind of compound and multiply. So it was a bit of a challenge, kind of like managing the whiskey and not letting it go too long, because otherwise you just end up with this over extracted, overly dry, tannic whiskey, which is not very pleasant. So that was probably the biggest challenge, I think, using powerful barrels in a pretty intense climate.
From a blending perspective, and that's obviously very challenging. How did you like resolve if barrels were like over extracted? Especially, I mean, eventually, I'm sure like what happened is you didn't age that long, but as you're dealing with this problem head on, like how does this get resolved?
That was kind of challenging, because like once it goes too far, it's hard to, well, you can't take out maturation really, can you? So what we'd do, if we kind of had a batch that was going too far, we'd sometimes re-rack into basically dead barrels, so barrels that had been used for forever and had nothing real left to give it. So you could kind of slow the maturation process down that way. But then I think also a lot of that came down to the blending side as well. So anytime we'd put a blend together, even for any of our kind of a core range projects, we'd always use a big cross section of ages. So use some younger stuff for some brightness and some lift, and then you use the kind of the older, more intense stuff for some of like those more developed and richer characters. So I think that's the kind of the fun part about blending, because you kind of you have all these components which by themselves are like still perfectly fine whiskey, but probably not, you wouldn't share it around and make a commercial product about it. But when you blend them all together, that's kind of where the magic happens, and starts taking out all these parts and bring them together to kind of create a better product. So the kind of the sum is better than the all the components put together, or all the individual components, I guess. So yeah, kind of that was kind of the way around it, just like managing the stock that's gone too far, but then also working out where to put that in a blend, and how to use that whiskey that does kind of get a bit too old.
Absolutely. And I think, that's really like the interesting part of blending. And I'd love for you to just dive into your perspective on how to make the best whiskey possible, because you're always dealing with all these variables. That's like the truth of it, and it's never the same. So like dealing with that is just fascinating in itself from a day-to-day perspective. What's been your mentality for blending?
I think, and I think it's probably changed over the years as well. I kind of as I learn more about whiskey in itself, but then also learned more about making whiskey in Melbourne. So probably my ideas and views have changed over the time. But I'm a big fan of kind of my kind of mentality is like, the more I've got to work with, I think the better product I can make. So I really love having parcels of whiskey of different ages, different oak types. So we use a lot of French oak and American oak, different cooperages as well. So you get kind of French oak barrels and wineries, but there'd be a vast difference in the cooperage. So whoever, I guess, initially made that barrel, they've got their own processes of toasting and seasoning of the wood, and then you'd see those variations kind of as the whiskey matures. So yeah, so for kind of my approach, I always enjoyed working with a lot of different parcels and components of blending and whiskey tier to make that blend and put it together. And then probably I guess another thing what I really like doing is like using I guess you can't see this because it's a podcast, but I'm saying Solera system in quotation marks. I really liked keeping portions of blends back. So I'd make a blend, I don't know, let's say 15-20% of it, and put that kind of back to barrel, or it's like really old barrels that weren't going to go anywhere, and then using that in the next blend as well. So you kind of had this homogenized mix of blends, and I think that really helped for consistency. So especially for the core range products that people expect to be kind of the same day in, day out. So because you're right, like every barrel tastes different. You can use same barrels, same cooperage from the same winery, food on the same day, mature for the same amount of time, and at the end of the day, you can have two different products. So it's just part of the nature of using like barrels and organic products, that flavors change and develop over time. So kind of using those processes, like a lot of stock to work with, using a Solera system, were kind of two big things that I used probably throughout my whole whiskey time at Starward and my whole whiskey career, and I still use to this day when I'm putting blends together. So yeah, that's probably something that's kind of stuck with me, and I'll probably continue to work on that and develop that technique over the next few years as well.
I love it because like my first start in the industry was in quality control, and everything you just said makes me feel like you're gearing towards a very consistent product.
Yeah.
Like everything that you're working towards is consistency. And I think that's something that is potentially easier achieved when you're large and you have all this volume to work with.
Yeah.
But I'd love to hear like your perspective with like when you're really small, like how is that still manageable?
It definitely gets easier the bigger you get. That's for sure. Because when I first started at Starward, I think I was employee number 11, tiny team. We didn't have that many barrels, so it was a challenge in the early days because you get these wildly varying barrels, and you're still trying to make the same consistent product. So it's definitely harder. It's definitely harder when you got less to work with, because you kind of at the mercy of like what these barrels are looking like. But when you have more to work with, more barrels to kind of play around with, you can dial in the blend a lot easier. So you can just go, I need a little bit more of this like American vanilla and oak kind of flavor. I'll look at this parcel of American oak that I know that are kind of a bit more developed, and you can just bring in a few barrels and really fine tune it, which is great. So that's probably a blend of some of the big blends I was doing was probably like 80 to 100 barrels. So it's easy. I'm gonna say it's easy when you're in that kind of situation, but it's if you've only got 5 or 6 barrels to work with, you're kind of limited on what levers you can pull. So it definitely gets easier as you grow in size and have a big depth of inventory. So wide range of barrels, ages, types, varieties, and stuff. So yeah, it is hard. It is hard on you when you don't have much to work with.
Having seen that kind of transition from small to larger lots, would you still recommend like that same like approach, or is there a different approach you'd start with that kind of gears you towards the approach for a larger amount of barrels?
Probably a different approach for if working with distilleries now that have probably less inventory and stuff. And I think it's definitely harder working with less products. And so kind of where I'm at the moment is working with a few small distilleries, and it's more probably individual barrel approach. So tasting a lot more barrels, thinking about them, running sense like kind of flavor notes and like where does this barrel fit into this like big blend spectrum. And so the basis and the principles of blending still the same, but probably have to just think about it a lot more and think where does this barrel in particular fit in this blend, or does it not fit in this blend? Does it fit in a blend that's ready in 6 months or 12 months time? So I think the kind of the basis is the philosophy of blending still there, but it's probably a bit more labor intensive. You have to think about it a bit more and much more, like an individual barrel perspective rather than like a whole raft of components, like flavor components, I guess. That hope that kind of makes sense. It was the basis is kind of still there, but you just have to take a bit more of probably care in your approach, I guess, for lack of better words.
And I think you're teeing me up great for my next question, which is like a sensory program, which is paramount to, your blending, especially when you're small. So I'd love for you to kind of talk about, for like a craft distillery, you have 12 barrels to choose from.
Yeah.
Like, what is your recommendation for like the sensory training program to help with that consistency at small scale and then gearing towards larger?
Yeah. And I guess for anyone out there that's like kind of in that early stages or just has a handful of barrels, sensory training is the hardest part, I think, of all kind of the production side. Obviously, I'm biased because I work in this area, but I think sensory training and developing kind of a sensory program is probably the hardest part of whiskey and blending. It's because everyone's palate's different. So people have strengths, weaknesses. Some people are really sensitive to flavors and compounds. Some people are totally blind to certain elements as well. So I think probably for my advice is like, just taste a lot. Obviously, be careful of the consumption of alcohol, but taste a lot of your barrels and get your team involved wherever you can. So everyone can kind of like learn the flavors, learn how the whiskey looks at different ages over that maturation period, and kind of like write your notes down as well. So it's really good to keep good records of what this barrel tasted like on this date. So then in 6-12 months, you can kind of look at that barrel again and see how it's developed, and you've got some notes written there of what it did taste like prior. So I think in-house, like that's great. You just gotta taste, really kind of develop kind of a big image of what your flavor profiles are, and I think that to kind of extend that into more of a training and development. I mean, there's a lot of cool programs that are up and running now. WESEP is a wine-based training program, which has recently developed like a spirits program as well. So I'm pretty sure it's like an internationally run program. It's big here in Australia. I'm sure it exists very vastly in the States as well. And there's a few other like kind of industry things. We did one called Flavor Active, which is they send you out little like flavor capsules that you mix in with whiskey, so you can kind of really see what individual flavors are. But they also do a lot of stuff with faults and taints and everything like that. So obviously those things come at a price, but they're really good to see different kind of flavors. And yeah, like probably the faults and stuff is a really important one to pick up on, because you don't want to start sending out faulty whiskey, or you could be blind to something that you can't even see it, and then you release that product into the world, and it's not good. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard work developing a sensory kind of program and training people. But you kind of just got to get stuck into it, put the time behind and dedicate some time to it, because once you have a team that's kind of trained and up and running, it makes your life, if you're the blender, a hell of a lot easier than going forward. So yeah, I recommend you just got to put the time in, and it'll pay dividends in the long run.
Watching people kind of like train up in sensory too is fascinating, because you really kind of like dive into the essence of who they are, and you learn a lot about, like, I don't know, like you mentioned, flavor blindness or fault blindness. Is there anything like with the training people that you just were like shocked, like you can't taste this? Like, what is you can't taste jasmine, like, and that's not that shocking, that's pretty common, but like, has there been an instance like that with your training?
Yeah. So I do like a lot of work for the team, and now today I do like most of my work is revolved around kind of sensory training and stuff like that. But it's I think it's probably less of a shock for me than it is the person receiving that news of like, I think you're blind to this flavor or this fault or something, and it's a realization. Like, people don't get offended or anything, but it's like they then realize, like, I think it's a big kind of like moment, like, oh, actually, like, that's why I've never tasted this flavor or this fault before, because actually I can't. And you just got to explain to them that it's like, it's every person on this world has flavors and aromas and things like they are really sensitive to or can't see at all. So and I think a lot of people don't understand that. And I think a lot of people kind of think like this product tastes like this flavor in particular. But yeah, it's our palates are wildly different, and even just from what food and drinks you kind of grow up with, kind of can develop that how your flavor and kind of senses react to certain things. And so yeah, so I think it's always funny having that conversation with people thinking, oh, I don't think you can actually taste or smell this kind of compound. So yeah, it's a very interesting kind of process to go through and learning the strengths and weaknesses of everyone's palate.
And I'm going to ask as well, do you like know if you are like really sensitive to anything, or really like, I'm blanking on the word, if there's a blindness that you have as well?
Yeah, so definitely my sensitivity is probably like sulfur in whiskey. I can pick it up so easy, and I think that's probably been a really good strength to have, is working with wine barrels. But also probably conversely, I don't think I find tannins that powerful. And when you're dealing with wine barrels and whiskey maturation, it's probably something that's not great to have on kind of my weaknesses. I think that's kind of part of why, like when I was at Starward, I had a blending team. So myself and kind of two others, and we all had different strengths and weaknesses. So if someone said that this blend is too tannic, I'd just take their word for it, because they're better at that component than what I am. So yeah, so I think it's fine to, like, as long as there's no issues having strengths and weaknesses in what you can and can't taste. But I think that the really important thing is understanding what you can and can't taste. And if you can't taste something, get someone near you that can taste that, and then you'll be fine.
Right. Like it's not a fault. Like you're not in trouble if you can't taste something. Certainly if you can't, like, get help.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah. Take their word for it, because it will save you a few headaches.
Yes. With tannins, is it something like you discovered you weren't sensitive to, like, after career in wine, or is it like even before then that was something that you could recognize?
I think I started noticing it really early in the wine industry, because people would talk about, this is really tannic wine and really, really aggressive and stuff. And I was just drinking, and I was like, oh yeah, that's pretty good. I don't know what you're complaining about. And then I think once I happened a few times, I kind of realized, oh, like, maybe this is something that I am not sensitive to. And obviously I can still taste tannins and dryness and astringency and everything, but just not probably, if it's at high levels, that probably just doesn't bother me like it would bother someone else.
I imagine that also might mean that you might like IPAs a little bit more than the average person, and maybe black coffee.
Absolutely. Love an IPA and a black coffee.
And that's what I think is so fun about tasting too. It's like you're sensitive to it, but you also, like, it's the same thing with jasmine. Not everyone hates that.
Yeah.
Not everyone hates that. No. So while it is a fault, it's not always off-putting. And the same, like, tannins might be a fault at a higher degree, but it isn't off-putting to everyone. And that's kind of goes into the whole, there's a whiskey in the world for everyone, no matter what your palate is. Like, there's going to be someone out there who buy tannic whiskey to be like, this is the best thing ever.
Yeah.
What do you normally drink? IPAs, like triple strength. Like, of course you like this whiskey.
And at the end of the day, that's why we have such a vast array of great products. If everyone had the same flavor profiles and flavor preferences, everyone would be making the same, or there'd probably only be a handful of distilleries in the world, and they'd just be pumping out the same things. So it's probably good that we all have different flavor preferences.
It makes life interesting. I would love to. We talked a lot about your work at Starward, but you have also since left there. You left in 2024.
Yeah. Yep. So pretty much the end of last year, I finished up my time there, just short of 10 years. So it was a big stint there, and especially for where the industry is. And then kind of coincided with the start of summer, and I was working a lot, bit burnt out at both ends. And then the summer came up, and like, oh, I need a break. And I was moving house at the same time and had to renovate a bathroom. So it kind of all coincided really well. So I spent the summer off renovating my bathroom, which is probably more stressful than working. And then kind of decided to go down the path of doing some consultancy work. Just from being in the industry for 10 years here and it being a small industry as well, you meet a lot of people, a lot of connections and stuff. And I knew there was a few distilleries out there that were just looking for an extra pair of hands, and especially for the kind of the maturation side and blending and barrel management, which I was doing every day at Starward. So for me, it was great because I can kind of use my very niche skills that I've kind of picked up in the industry over the years and help out basically mates in the industry, work with them in the distilleries and kind of just go in and kind of not tell them what to do, but just say, I've seen this before. Don't make the same mistakes that I've done. This is how you can kind of like get around it and save you a few headaches in the future. So that's kind of how I started. And then it was just kind of connections through that, word of mouth, kind of started picking up a few more little projects here and there. And then it's taken me kind of all over now. So a lot of stuff locally, interstate. So a bit of work down in Tasmania, which they make a lot of, which is kind of the southern little island off the mainland of Australia, which they make a lot of single malt down there, and then to New Zealand as well. So doing a bit of work over there with the distilleries. So it's been fantastic. It's just really cool to meet a lot of new people, see a lot of new products and whiskies, and see what people are doing kind of out the industry outside of my little bubble that I was in before. And yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at now. I'm just doing kind of a bit of distillery consultancy work. Pretty much still all whiskey, blending, barrel, everything. And it's great. It's been a really nice like kind of change of pace and probably using my brain a little bit more, which has been really nice.
I mean, it's fascinating, the like road from burnout to consultancy. Like I have no idea what I'm talking about from a personal standpoint. That's never happened to me. Of course it has. And so like consulting is this really interesting, I think, I don't know. I feel like there's some people who think it's like a gap year experience, but it's also something that's so like gratifying and fun and different, especially if you've been working someplace for a long time, where you get to suddenly kind of, the world is your oyster and you're open to all these new experiences and seeing things in new ways that you kind of were kept in a little shell for a while. And you see things and you're really consistent, you're making something and it's great, but like you don't get to see the whole world, if that makes sense.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and I think that's probably what I've enjoyed the most about it. Just getting these new experiences and probably I didn't realize just how kind of, I guess, in my, let's just say, Starward bubble I was, because I was just doing it every day, day in, day out. And I think it was probably also maybe a little bit nervous when I did start the kind of down the consultancy path. It's like, I know how to make Starward whiskey with my eyes closed, but do I know how to make this other person's whiskey and help them? But so it was kind of a bit nerve-wracking at the start, but I think, yeah, it's probably been the most enjoyable part is the kind of the growth and learning that I've had as well through this. Just being exposed to so many more products, different types of products, and I think that helps me grow as well, and then hopefully become a better consultant, better blender, a bit more of a well-rounded kind of person to kind of come into your distillery and give you advice where you need. So yeah, it's been a journey, but I've absolutely been loving it so far. It's I think one thing that we're kind of blessed with in this industry is how many good people are in this industry. Like people kind of get into this industry because they have a passion, and it's a kind of a shared, I guess it's a shared passion that we all have is making spirits and booze and good products as well. So yeah, it's nice working with a whole bunch of really, really good people.
I love the perspective on growth mentality. And I'd love for you to just kind of, walk through like something that you've just noticed in your time as consulting what you've grown in?
I think I've always had that kind of philosophy of I never want to be stagnant. Never want to be stagnant in a role, in a job, and just kind of working for the sake of working. And it's probably partly why the kind of the alcohol industry appealed to me, because even though you're making the kind of the same products, everything changes so much. Seasonality, dealing with different raw materials, and there's always kind of challenges and things to kind of work through. And the last thing I want to do is kind of be stuck in an office job and just work behind a computer. So yeah, so kind of touching on like not being stagnant, but then also the growth. Having to, I think for me personally, I'm a naturally an introverted person, so then going down the consultancy realm was had its own, like, I guess, challenges as well. And like, oh, what do you mean I have to talk to all these people and like do all these things and like communicate, bring a lot of people together and like kind of communicate, project manage some kind of things. So for me, that's been a huge personal growth thing as well, which I hated but also loved at the same time, because I hate it because I'm an introverted person, but I love it because it's teaching me new skills and I guess helping me develop as a person as well. So yeah, so it's been a big journey, and I think it's come at a really interesting time as well where the industry is, because I think there's probably a bit of a trend globally. I think kind of like pre-COVID and during COVID, there was a real big boom here in Australia of like pre-COVID, it was the youthful industry. There's a lot of exciting things happen. Everyone kind of wanted to get the next best, like the new exciting thing on the shelf. And there was a lot of producers coming to the market at that time and just selling out whiskey. So first release, $250 a bottle for a 500 ml bottle, and it would just sell out instantly. And so COVID hit, kind of like when it was a bit shaky at the start, but then everyone's stuck at home, nothing else to do other than kind of drink gin and tonics at 10 o'clock in the morning. So there was a huge boom during COVID in Australia of people, because they were spending less kind of being out, that they had disposable money to kind of buy premium products. And a lot of people were buying better wines, beers and spirits. And it was kind of weird because we were at work and was wearing masks and we were in little shift bubbles, but we just couldn't make enough booze. We couldn't bottle fast enough for what the demand was. And I think a lot of distilleries in Australia and around the world really kind of saw that and so like, we're going to base all our future sales forecast on this current demand of whiskey. And I was in Scotland kind of just post-COVID, and a lot of distilleries there were running at about 110%. They were just pumping out spirit whiskey. And I think once kind of COVID passed and people got back into the kind of the routine of life, straight after that here in Australia, all the interest rates went up, people's mortgages went up. And then the first thing to go when you have to pay more mortgage is luxury products. One of those luxury products is whiskey. And then so people stopped spending like they were. So it was this real shift in make more, sell more, to then all of a sudden the brakes got slammed on pretty fast, I reckon within probably a 12 to 18 month period here. And then people just weren't spending, weren't buying. A lot of distilleries had invested heavily in terms of capital for upgrades, making more product and stuff. And then we're kind of left with like the sales forecasts that were unachievable, obviously never got reached. And then we kind of saw that in Australia and obviously around the world very recently with like distilleries kind of filing to bankruptcy, going to administration, a lot of people being made redundant, partly while I'm a consultant at the moment. And then so it's been a real big shift, I think, in the landscape of whiskey. And I think there's still quite a few challenges that lie ahead from an Australian perspective, but also I think probably America is probably in a similar kind of situation as well. And like there's a lot of challenges in the industry at the moment. And I think we will be fine. Like it's just a lot of distilleries will come out the other side. And unfortunately there's probably going to be some that won't. There's going to be a lot of people that will, unfortunately, probably lose their jobs, but hopefully, like the industry kind of still grows and develops, and that it's just kind of a shift in kind of the landscape of whiskey. But I think overall, the industry will continue to grow, continue to thrive, and we're still going to, at the end of the day, have really, really good products that we can all kind of sit around and enjoy. And it's kind of why we do what we do to make a really delicious product and sit around and enjoy and drinking it.
I think it's really interesting, especially like when you're at one place and one distillery, and you're kind of, watching the last 5 years go by, and you're watching all this rapid growth, and you're watching these forecasts, and it's just like people are asking for more and more. Was there a time when you were like, is this really going to happen? Like, are these forecasts accurate? Or like, are we like, is it really that everyone is doing this right now? Like, what does this make sense? Did you ever have a moment of where you're like, what's happening? What's going to happen? Is this real?
Yeah. And I think part of me did, whether I realized it at the time or not. It just felt, it was exciting, right? There was money being thrown around everywhere. We were getting all this new equipment. So it was great. I was loving it because I could make heaps of whiskey and make all these like kind of cool projects and stuff as well. But I think part of me as well realized that like it was, and I think not just for the company itself, but I think for the industry wide, this doesn't feel sustainable, because how much product everyone is making, it's going to result in people needing to drink a lot more whiskey than what they currently are. And I think during COVID, people were, but I think it wasn't really sustainable growth. And I think, there was definitely some kind of signs there that led to that maybe this isn't the right approach or a sustainable approach. But I don't work in sales or marketing or anything like that, so it's easy for me to sit in my armchair and say, oh, you're doing this wrong. But I wasn't on, that was not what I get employed for. So it was a bit of a challenge, but at the end of the day, that's not where my expertise lies. So, but yeah, it was a really interesting time, and I think we're probably feeling the consequences of that at the moment across the industry. But yeah, like I said, there's going to be constant changes in battles and different kind of economical landscapes that we just have no control over. So we just kind of have to roll with the punches sometimes, and just kind of hopefully build better, sustainable businesses, continue to make really, really good quality products, and we'll come out the other side and people still be drinking some really, really good, probably a little bit older whiskeys now. There's so much inventory there laying down. So who knows? Well, it could end up in some really good products in a few years' time.
I'll believe it. And I think that is a great place to stop. For more than 30 years, G&D Chillers has had the proven solution for distilleries. Visit them today at gdchillers.com. If you've enjoyed this podcast, go to spiritsanddistilling.com and sign up for our free newsletter featuring new stories every week from some of the best writers and distillers in the distilling world. If anyone wants to hear a little bit more about your journey and what you got going on, where can they find you?
I've got Instagram. The Cask code is if you want to kind of find out more about me and my journey. But also if you want to kind of taste some whiskies that I've kind of worked on in the past, Starward is available in the States, in quite a few states. I don't know once exactly, but on the kind of like the east and west coast, I think there's quite a few. And also probably one, if you can still find it, which I think can still be available. We did a really cool kind of collaboration a few years ago with Lagavulin. So we finished some of our whiskey in Lagavulin barrels, which was wild, absolutely wild. And I reckon there's still some of that kind of floating around the States. So if you see it around, you can get your hands on it, definitely give it a try, because it's a really fun project that we got to do with the Lagavulin team. So give it if you can find it,
Ron
definitely
Swanson
give
there?
it a shot. Yeah.
Oh man, every time I hear Lagavulin now, I'm like, Ron Swanson, he was there. I always forget his real name, but Ron Swanson, yes. So lovely when art imitates life. Perfect. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another in-depth distilling conversation for you. Thanks for joining us. Cheers.
This podcast has been brought to you by Spirits and Distilling for those who love to make and drink great spirits. Join our free newsletter today at spiritsanddistilling.com for pragmatic, technical, and creative distilling stories in your inbox every week. Sign up now at spiritsanddistilling.com or click on the link in the show notes.